Well, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. As we walk with Jesus and with Louisa through this first volume, Book of Heaven, um, it leaves us with a glimpse on the way that Jesus teaches Louisa to be similar to him, right? And he invites her uh, to keep herself focused in him with no distractions. And today we're going to read about the four ways that Jesus communicates with Louisa. Very interesting. It's the four ways that he communicates with her. And it might be the way that he communicates with us too. So let's start reading. I move on to speak about something else. By order of the current confessor, I will obey in manifesting the various ways in which the Lord has spoken to me. It seems to me that the ways in which the Lord has spoken to me are four, but these four ways of speaking of Jesus are very different from the inspirations. The first way is when the soul goes out of herself. However, first I want to explain a little bit better this going out of myself. It happens in two ways. The first is instantaneously, almost a flash, and it is so sudden that it seemed to me that the body would lift a little bit from the bed in order to follow the soul, but then it would stay there. And it seemed to me that the body would remain as dead while the soul would follow Jesus, walking throughout the whole universe, the earth, the air, the seas, the mountains, purgatory, and heaven, where many times he showed me the place where I will be after I die. The other way, then, where the soul is to go out, is more quiet. It seems that the body dozes off insensibly and remains as though petrified in the presence of Jesus Christ. However, the soul remains with the body, and the body no longer feels anything of external things. Even if all the universe turned upside down, even if they've burned me up and reduced me to pieces. So this is the first way that Jesus communicates with her. She says that it's like the first is like instantaneously. It looks like if the soul is going to go away from the body, but it stays. And then she says that the body seems to remain dead. But then the second way, in that first mode that Jesus communicates with her, is that the soul goes out, but it's more quiet. It's not instantaneous, right? And it seems that the body dozes. It means that the body is like sleepy, I would say, off insensibly and remains as though petrified. So in this first mode, but the second way is that the body petrifies. And we see Louisa throughout the Book of Heaven that the way that is most that she describes is that her body is petrified. She doesn't say it that way, but it's like the way that others see her. She is petrified. So the second way, so different, of going out of myself, I have noticed sensibly, because in the first way, having to obey the confessor when he would come to wake me up, I would see him from the place where Jesus would lead me. That is, from the ends of the earth, or from the air, or from the mountains, or from the sea, or from purgatory. or even from heaven itself. Even more, it seemed to me that I would not have enough time so that the soul would be found in the body by the confessor, and therefore I would not be able to obey. It seemed that so far away as I was with my soul, I say it seemed to me that I would bustle about and become all anxious and worried that I might not be able to let myself be found there in time by the confessor, and therefore I would not be able to obey. However, however, I confess that I have always found myself there in time, and it seemed to me that the soul would enter into the body before the confessor would begin to give me the obedience to wake up. Even more, I tell the truth, many times from afar, I could see the confessor coming, but in order not to leave Jesus, it seemed that I would not think that the confessor was coming and that Jesus himself would hurry me to return to the soul into the body so as to be able to obey the confessor. And then I would feel a great reluctance of leaving Jesus, but obedience would win. And in leaving Jesus, he himself would either kiss me or embrace me or would do something else to take leave of me. And I, upon leaving my dear Jesus, would say to him, I go to the confessor, but you, my good Jesus, come back soon as the confessor goes. So the second form, the second way of Jesus communicating with her is like she's with him, right? It's sensibly. She kind of sees him, she talks to him, and he talks to her back, and she follows him wherever he goes. Then these then are two ways in which the soul seemed to go out of the body. And in these two ways in which the soul goes out, God speaks to me. This way of speaking, he himself calls intellectual speaking. So these two ways are intellectual speaking. I will try to explain it. After the soul has gone out of the body, finding herself before Jesus, she has no need of words in order to understand that the Lord wants to tell her, nor does the soul need to speak in order to make herself understood. But by means of the intellect, oh, how will we understand each other when we are together? From a light that comes from Jesus into my intellect, I feel everything that my Jesus wants to make me understand being impressed within me. This way is very high and sublime, so much so that the nature can hardly adapt itself to explain it with words. It can barely give some idea. This way of Jesus of making himself understood is extremely rapid. In one simple instant, one learns many sublime things, more than by reading entire books. That's so interesting because, well, you guys can interrupt whenever you want, right? But I'm just reading through. And this is very interesting because she says that it's like in an instant. That means that this is happening in no time. This is we can understand that this is happening in no time. That's why she says, in one simple instant, one learns many sublime things, more than by reading entire books. Oh, what a most ingenious teacher Jesus is. In one simple instant, he teaches so many things, while to someone else it would take entire years. If he manages it all, because the terrestrial teacher does not have the power of being able to draw the will of his disciple, or to infuse things in his mind without effort and toil. But not with Jesus. His sweetness and loveliness of his gesture and gentleness of his speaking are so great, and then he is so beautiful that as soon as the soul sees him, she feels so drawn that sometimes the speed in which she runs after Jesus is so great that almost without realizing it, she finds herself transformed into the beloved in such a way that the soul is no longer capable of distinguishing her terrestrial being. So much is she identified with the divine being. Who could say that the soul feels in that state? It would take Jesus himself or a soul perfectly separated from the body, because in finding herself surrounded once again by the wall of this body and losing that light which before kept her submerged, the soul loses much and remains obscured. So if she tries to say something, she can only do it roughly. To give an idea, I will say that I imagine someone born blind who has never had the good of seeing what is contained in the entire universe. And for a few minutes, he had a good of opening his eyes to the light and was able to see everything that is contained in the world: the sun, the heavens, the sea, the many cities, the many machines, the varieties of flowers, and the many other things that are in the world. And after those few minutes of light, he returned to the blindness of before. Now could be described distinctly everything that he has seen. He could give a sketch, say a few things confusedly. Now, something similar happens when the soul finds herself separated and then back into the body. I don't know whether I am speaking nonsense, just as that poor blind one would remain in the sorrow of the lost sight, and same for the soul. She lives moaning and almost in the violent state, because the soul feels always violently drawn toward the highest good. The attraction toward himself that Jesus leaves in the soul is so great that the soul will like to remain always attracted within her God. But this cannot be, and therefore she lives as if she lived in purgatory. I add that the soul has nothing of her own. In this state, everything is the operating of that the Lord does. I don't know if someone wants to say something about these readings till now. We have reviewed two modes, right? One is the intellectual mode of Jesus that has two different ways, that is instantaneously, and the other one that the body is petrified. And the second one is that the soul is so attracted to Jesus that let me kind of read it again. That the soul is so drawn to Jesus that it's very speedy, which she runs after Jesus so great that almost without realizing it, she finds herself transformed into the beloved. It's like if she's so drawn to him that it's like she has become one with him. She has been transformed into him. And she even says, what it takes to a teacher to talk and to say so many things for years, I can understand what he's telling me in a second, in a simple instant.
Doesn't this remind you of something?
Of what?
When Jesus appears to the soul for a moment before it dies and give it his intelligence and making understand who is he.
Mm-hmm.
The soul is already in the plane of eternity.
Yes.
And this is the one moment before it dies.
Mm-hmm.
Don't remember this reading?
Yes, I do. It's when
Something peculiar.
yes.
Just like it's a curiosity, something.
It's like the last fishing.
Yes.
The last vision of the soul when Jesus appears to the soul and he
And show it everything.
yes all what he has done, um how the soul was created, and the purpose of that creation,
Yes.
and then the soul can see himself the way it is, and then at the end Jesus asked him, do you want with me or not? I don't remember the lecture, but
Remember the lecture, but
yeah,
the
so
number, but
it's like in an instant.
because the first is that the soul leaves the body
Mhm.
and finds itself in some way in eternity. I
Mhm.
mean, in God.
You are talking about the last minute of life?
Yes.
Mm.
Something peculiar, something.
Is the last second of love.
The last second of love. Yeah, because it says the lecture says that he surrounds the body, the soul with love.
Is it the last vision?
The last vision too.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's volume 35.
Volume 35.
35.
The reading is the 40,
35.
paragraph 7.
3540.
Yeah.
The paragraph is 7 and 8.
See if I can find it, because this is something new for us. We didn't know that the way that at the moment that the body leaves the soul forever, but that the soul leaves the body forever, we didn't know what happened, but Jesus is telling us what happens in that very moment. And a person that maybe in life was never like drawn into God, into Jesus, even people that say that they don't believe in God, at that very moment, just Jesus just appears there and tells him, this is me, and this is you, and this is how I created your soul, and this is all what I have done for you. Do you want to come with me forever, or do you want something different? I was just trying to find it, but since in the Book of Heaven in English it doesn't say like the paragraphs, maybe I can find it, and then next time we can start with this part just to review it. If you guys want to do that, is that okay?
It will
And-
be fine.
And the second, the state of petrification, don't reminds you something similar, like ecstasies of the girls of Caravandal, when the people they hit them and did thousand things, but they
They even pinch them.
yes, but it's curious example, but
And they were not sensible to any
yes, she
extent.
doesn't feel anything in the body. It's like a stone, like a rock. And curiously, the same thing happens on Luisa. It's just curious. Another example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way that God, the mode of that God talks to us.
Yeah.
That's why this didn't only happen to Lisa. It happens to many other people in
Yes.
different ways. Just
But
like you said in
But we
Caravan.
have this example in these girls of Caravandan. this state of petrification.
And also in Medjugorje, like right now, maybe Isabel went like that. Maybe she was thinking about it. In Medjugorje, when it's not Ivanka, it's I think it's Mirana that she gets these teachings from Our Lady every month. Well, you can see when Our Lady appears, she's not there. She's not there. Everything is like nobody exists other than Our Lady and her.
Yes.
You can see how she moves her her mouth. She moves it, but nobody can listen to what she's saying. Interesting, right?
Yes.
And the conclusion of this is that they're not here in Earth. They're really in no time.
Yeah, the soul vivifying all his body. But I think it's like a kind of bilocation of the soul. Something like that. I don't know. I don't have the words to explain that.
But yes, it is. That's the way that I think that's the perfect word to put there, a bilocation.
Yes.
Well, we're going to see another, like right here in the same volume, Louisa's first bilocation. We're going to read it. I don't remember exactly where it is, but we're going to read it as well. Okay. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
Now I will try to explain the second way that Jesus has in speaking. It is when the soul, finding herself outside of herself, is that where I am? Or did I go too far? Oh, yeah, here. Now I will try to explain the second way that Jesus has in speaking. And it is when the soul, finding herself out of herself, sees the person of Jesus Christ, for example, as a child or crucified or in any other attitude. And the soul sees the Lord pronouncing the words from his mouth. And the soul answers from her mouth. Sometimes it happens that the soul begins to converse with Jesus, just as two intimate spouses would do. However, the speaking of the Lord is very moderate, just 4 or 5 words. Isn't that interesting? That we speak so many words and Jesus only 4 or 5 words, and we can understand a whole book with those 4 or 5 words, and sometimes even just one word. Very rarely does it prolongs a little bit. But in that very little speaking, how much light he introduces into the soul. I seem to see a little rivulet at first sight, but in looking more closely, instead of the rivulet, I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, rivulet or rivulet. One can see an immensity, such as one word spoken by Jesus. The immensity of the light that it leaves in the soul is such that in ruminating it thoroughly, she discovers so many things sublime and profitable in her soul as to remain astonished. I believe that if all the learned would unite together, they will all remain confounded and mute in one single word of Jesus. Now, this way is more suitable for the human nature, and it can easily be manifested because the soul, upon entering herself, brings with her that which she has heard from the mouth of our Lord and communicates it to the body. It is not so easy when it is through the intellect. So the first way the first mode of Jesus communicating is intellectual. And it's a little bit more difficult to communicate it, right? To say what's happening between the soul and Jesus, because it's an intellectual speaking. But this second mode, Jesus talks and the soul talks back. And even though it's only a few words, the soul communicates to the body. That's why it's easier to express it. To me, I think that Jesus has this way of speaking in order to adapt himself to the human nature. It is not that he needs the word in order to make himself understood, but in this way, the soul understands more easily and she can manifest it to the confessor. In sum, Jesus acts like a most knowledgeable, wise, intelligent teacher who possesses all science to the highest degree, and no one can equal him. But since he finds himself amid disciples who have not yet learned the first syllables of the alphabet, keeping all other studies within himself, he teaches the ABC to the disciples. Something like the ABC that he taught his disciples when he was in this earth, right? They didn't understand, so he had to go little by little. Well, now in this other work of God, it's the same thing. We don't know about this new. This is completely new to us. This third work of God. So that's the way he has to start with ABCs to teach us. And this is exactly the volume 1. It's the ABC of the divine teachings.
And word from Jesus, how much light it can have. And that is the book of heaven. He speaks through this book. And this is why we must read word by word.
Mm-hmm.
Because in one word, we have so much light. You know?
That is so true. Just like it says here, sometimes he only expresses one word, and we understand so many things with that word. That's why when we read the book of heaven, we cannot read it like very fast. We have to read, just like you said, word by word, because there's so many things that he communicates to the soul that if we read it like very fast, we just won't understand. We won't understand it because it communicates to the soul, but then the soul communicates to the body, and that is when we can speak about it. If it doesn't communicate to the body, it's like an intellectual, just like it says here, it's intellectual. You can see it, you can understand it, but you cannot talk about it. But when you read it and you let and you ruminate every word, then it takes a little bit of time, like to make those words like life, vivid life in the soul. But that's the way Jesus works, just like it says here, ABC.
Yes. And he adapts to us, to our human nature.
So how good is Jesus? He adapts himself to the learned and speaks to them in a very high manner, in such a way that in order to understand him, they have to study well what he tells them. And he adapts himself to the ignorant, pretending to be he himself a little bit ignorant. And he speaks in a low manner, in such a way that no one may remain on an empty stomach from the lessons of this divine teacher. The third way in which Jesus speaks to me is when, in speaking, he communicates its very substance to the soul. So that means life, right? It seems to me that just as when the Lord created the world, at one word things were created. In the same way, since his word is creative, in the very act in which he pronounces the word, he creates in the soul that very thing which he is saying. As, for example, Jesus says to the soul, "See how beautiful things are. As much as your eye may run over the earth and in the heaven, you will never find a beauty similar to me." At the speaking of Jesus, the soul feels a certain something divine enter into herself. The soul remains so very drawn towards this beauty, and at the same time, she loses attractions for all other things. As beautiful, as precious as they might be, they make no impression on her soul. What remains fixed in her and almost transmuted into herself is the beauty of Jesus. Of that beauty she thinks, which that beauty she feels invested, and she remains so enamored that if the soul did not operate another miracle, her heart would crack. And out of pure love for this beauty of Jesus, the soul would breathe her last, to fly into heaven and delight in this beauty of Jesus. I myself don't know whether I am speaking nonsense. In order to explain myself better about this substantial speaking of Jesus, I will say something else. Jesus says, "See how pure I am." In you also I want to find purity in everything. At these words, the soul feels a divine purity enter into herself. This purity is transmuted into herself, and she teaches and she reaches the point of living as if she no longer had a body. And so with the other virtues. Oh, how desirable is this speaking of Jesus. As for myself, I would give away everything that is on earth, if I could own it, to have one alone of these words of Jesus. If I can own it. And that is what Jesus wants to give us. He wants to give us the life of those words, like for example, purity. He wants to give us the life of his attributes, beauty, right? Immensity, mercy, whatever word he wants to transmute in us. He wants us to that word to be transmuted into life. It's not a word anymore. It's a life. And then she says, if I could own it, that is what Jesus wants us to have, to own his life. Not only the word, his life, but that word is a life, is a divine life, isn't it?
I think that the third way is fusing with him. That is when Jesus shared a truth with us. We are participating in his work, in that truth, and therefore we are having the same substance than he has. Therefore, he is creating his work in us, and he shares his work with us. That is having the same substance with him, which is having God in us and participating in all his work.
Yeah, it sounds like it is needed to be fused.
Yeah, fuse our life with him. But yeah, this is the volume 1.
Yes, we should to take into account.
But we can see this.
Yes, it's the essence that is at the back of this. But the important thing for me is that he adapts to the people.
And if we're talking about substance, the substance of God is love.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah,
is what he wants to transmute, right? He wants to transmute himself, and he is love. Beautiful. The fourth way in which Jesus speaks to me is when I find myself inside myself. That is in the natural state. This also happens in two ways. The first is when, while being inside myself, recollected in the interior of my heart, without articulation of voice or sound to the ear of the body, Jesus speaks interiorly. The second is just like we do it. And sometimes this happens even when I am distracted or I am speaking with other people. But one alone of these words is enough to recollect me if I am distracted, or to give me peace if I am disturbed, or to console me if I am afflicted. I will continue from where I left saying, and this is how he did it. So in this fourth way, Jesus is she is recollected. She's I would say she's awake, if that's the word that we can say. She's awake, she's recollected, she's interiorly, like from her heart, she is uh she is with she's listening to Jesus, right? In a silent way, recollected, but she's not sleeping. And the other way is when she is talking with other people, right? That he can say only one word and she just leaves everything aside, and then that word that he tells her recollects her, and she doesn't feel distracted at all. So I'm sure that we all experience one way or another these ways, right? That Jesus talks to us.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when we read the book of heaven and we recollect it and we're not distracted, well, he is talking to us. Or we might have somebody around us and momentarily, I don't know, there's something that comes to our mind, and it's Jesus who is talking to us at that moment. And it's like, I don't know if that happens to you guys, but sometimes um, we are interrupted when we're doing something, when we're doing like a reading in the book of heaven, or praying, or watching a video that has to do with the divine will or whatever, and we are interrupted. But that doesn't mean that if we're interrupted, we're going to keep distracted from Jesus. We just take care of whatever it is, and all of a sudden we go back where we were, because that recollection never ends with Jesus. And that happened to Luisa. Or sometimes we might be sleeping and we're dreaming, and kind of maybe it's not the way that happened to Luisa, right? That her soul wanted to leave her and she kind of elevated herself, or she petrified. Maybe we don't get petrified, but in our sleeps, I'm sure that our soul is in some way connected with Jesus, and many times he speaks to us in different ways in our dreams also.
Well, I think the first is when we are in recollection. that is in that communication, and God give us light to understand something. Jesus speak to us.
I'm just putting here something in the screen so we can kind of review the four modes.
Give us light to understand something. Jesus speak to us in our interior, a kind of intellectual way. And the second, which is very important to me, because it helps us to keep our attention of him, especially when we are distracted. It's like a kind of warning. It is to put our attention back of him and to recollect ourselves in his will again. And I
Yes.
think that is very usual, even when he asks us for some sacrifice. For example, do not eat the dessert. He speaks to us in a clear way inside us, and it is up to us to to have this obedience, the famous obedience or martyrdom of attention.
Or even, for example, when there's a situation that we all have situations every single day,
Yeah,
and then that situation can kind of like distract us because it makes us like think about what should I do, right? How should I address this? But then all of a sudden, if we listen to what Jesus is really telling us in that moment, what we do is that we just repair. We just repair what happens, and it's a way that Jesus is communicating to us and telling us, don't leave me alone. You know, do what I did, what I keep on doing, do it in my divine will. So those effects are going to extend to others. And that is a way of Jesus communicating with us in different situations every single day.
keep your attention in me.
Mhm.
That's all.
Yes. See me in everybody, right?
Mhm.
So let's review these the four ways. The first mode happens in two ways. Is when he himself says an intellectual speaking, right? There's two ways in this first mode, but both of them are intellectual. The soul goes out of itself like a flash of lightning rising from the body. Then it remains as if dead. Then it remains as if the body is dead on the bed, and the soul follows Jesus walking through the whole universe. It seems to Luisa that the body remains as if it's dead. And then in that first mode, but the second way is that Jesus says that the soul remains in the body, but as if it is asleep and as it is petrified because it remains without feeling anything of external things. So it is the spirit, the one who is following Jesus in this first mode. In the second mode, when the soul is out of the body, it seems Jesus and and the soul, both of them articulate words. And although Jesus speaks very little, what the soul hears and thinks, it can make with it and communicating it to the body. This way of communicating Jesus is easier for the soul to understand that when it is done by than when it is done by the intellect. So
I think Luisa is not speaking about spirit, just about soul, because a body without soul is dead.
yeah,
So
but
I think even though she didn't says, is the spirit that goes out.
Correct. Yes. The spirit is the one that goes out, because if the soul is the one that leaves the body, then the body will be dead. Right? But the spirit is part of the soul. Is that how you understand it, Guadalupe?
Yeah, the spirit is part of the soul, but part of the soul stays with the body. That's why they are alive. So the spirit is the one who goes out.
Exactly. So the third mode is when Jesus is speaking, and the soul participates of the same substance. That is, if Jesus says, for example, purity, then the person, the soul, will experience not only what the word is, but the life of the word. See how pure I am? Even in you, I want purity in everything, and purity is transmuted in her, and she feels as if she had no more body. So the soul participates of the substance of that word.
But this is because the power of the word of God, that when he speaks, immediately the thing is done. Not like us, that we speak to planificate, for planning something, and then later the thing will be real. But in God, he speaks, and immediately the thing is done.
Exactly. So all this happens not in a timely manner. This all happens in no time, in eternity. That's why the soul can participate of the same substance. Just like you said, God doesn't plan. He says something and it's done. Right?
But doesn't depend on eternity, depends on the quality of the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
The power that has the word of God.
So
Ermita, I have a doubt.
sure.
When Jesus pronounce one word and it's done immediately, we're talking about the first mode, isn't it? And the third is that he makes the soul to participate of his own substance.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that in the third mode, there's no necessarily a word. Is it?
No, in the third mode, if we read the book right now, when it's like the third mode, it says the third way in which Jesus speaks to me is when in speaking, he communicates its very substance to the soul. So it seems to me that just as when the Lord created the world at one word, things were created in the same way, since his word is creative. In the very act in which he pronounces the word, he creates, and the soul, that very thing which he is saying. As for example, Jesus says to the soul, "See how beautiful things are? As much as your eye may run over the earth and in heaven, you will never find a beauty similar to me." At the speaking of Jesus, the soul feels a certain something divine into herself. The soul remains so very drawn toward this beauty, and at the same time she loses attraction for all other things. As beautiful, as precious as they might be, they make no impression on her soul. what remains fixed into her and almost transmuted into herself is the beauty of Jesus. Of that beauty she thinks, with the beauty she feels invested, and she remains so enamored that if the Lord did not operate another miracle, her heart would crack, and out of pure love for his beauty, but for this beauty of Jesus, the soul would breathe her last to fly into heaven and delight in the beauty of Jesus. I myself don't know. That's what Jesus says. I myself don't know whether I am speaking nonsense. And then she keeps on saying, says, in order to explain myself better about this substantial speaking of Jesus, I will say something else. Jesus says, see how pure I am. If you also want to find purity in everything, all these words, the soul feels a divine purity enter into herself. It's like if that word comes alive, this purity is transmuted into herself, into her soul. And she reaches the point of living as if no longer had a body, and so with the other virtues. How desirable is this speaking of Jesus? As for myself, I would give away everything that is on earth if I could own it, to have one alone of these words of Jesus. So the soul participates, right? Jesus participates to the soul, or the soul in the soul is transmuted the substance of that word. Like, for example,
And in the first mode, there's no that. There's no
and then in
transmutation, there's no participation. In the first mode, so the soul only understands something.
in the first mode, the soul is with Jesus, or in different places, and they speak and they talk and everything, but everything is intellectual.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
In here in earth, the body looks like if she's like sleeping, for example, and in another way, it looks like the body is petrified.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I got it.
You got it? Okay. I'm glad. And then the fourth mode, it happens in two ways. Although meeting it in itself, Jesus' way of speaking is, as he himself says, an intellectual speaking. The first form is when the soul is recollected in itself and without articulating a word. Jesus speaks internally. Oh, I think I did something wrong here. I'm so sorry. Oh yeah, no, this is not right. I have to change this slide, because it's like a summary of the first mode. So the fourth mode, let me read it very quickly, and let me take this one out because this is not right. I'm sorry. The fourth way in which Jesus speaks to me is when I find myself inside myself, that is in the natural state. This also happens in two ways. The first is when, while being inside myself, recollected in the interior of my heart, without articulation of voice or sound to the ear of the body, Jesus speaks interiorly. So in that fourth one is when Jesus speaks interiorly, and the person is recollected. And the second way is that it's just like we do it. And sometimes this happens even when I am distracted or I am speaking with other people. But one alone of these words is enough to recollect me if I am distracted. So we might be distracted, but with one word that Jesus tells us, we just go back where we were supposed to be. So I don't know if somebody wants to add something to this, to these four ways of Jesus communicating. I think that the easier way to see it, with us that we're reading the book of heaven, or when we read the Bible, or when we're in mass, or is being recollected. That's how Jesus speaks, when we are recollected, right?
Or through another person.
Through another person, yes. Or just like he says, with only one word. So next week we are going to be reading about the new rules that Jesus indicates Luisa. It's a new system of life that he wants her to learn. So this is what we're going to read, okay?